Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final session of the day. This is going to be a real treat. Thank you for coming today, and we'll start our Boston week. My name is Chuck Bernstein. I'm your host today, and as you know, here at Suffolk University, it has been such a wonderful host to start Boston for this year and other years. As you might have noticed, it's downtown Boston with access to everything. It's just a place where you can access leaders, you can access the innovation system. It is as good as it gets in the country for finding innovation, accessing innovation, accessing industry. So really excited to be partnering with Suffolk University. And as you know, the goal of Startup Boston is to connect the Boston ecosystem. That's investors, founders, all the support mechanisms we need. And so this is a real treat at the end of the day. This is a volunteer organization, so anyone who want to get involved in Startup Boston next year, let us know and do it. And in the meantime, I'm going to bring up Dan Tenenbaum, who is the head of innovation here at Suffolk, and he will introduce the rest of the group. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks, Tommy. Thank you all for being here. My name is Gabe Tenenbaum. I'm a member of the faculty at Suffolk University Law School. I also oversee our Innovation and Technology program. I am ecstatic to be with you all today and our guests today. This is a real treat. Joining us online, we have the wonderful Brian Liu. Brian is one of the godfathers of legal technology. He's a co-founder of LegalZoom, a multi-billion-dollar company. He served as the CEO for several years until 2018. The company is now publicly listed. Brian has spent the last year or more at legal tech startup Overture Law, which is a referral platform for solo lawyers and small law firms. He's also a principal at L&F Brown, which is a law firm that is specifically devoted to the need of legal tech companies. Brian is a busy person. Next to me is the wonderful Julia Rogers. Julia is the CEO and founder of Hello Prenup and a proud Suffolk University Law School alumnus. Hello Prenup was the first legal tech company ever to win on the show Shark Tank. It's received investments from Kevin O'Leary and Nirav Tolia, and later investment from LegalZoom founder Brian Liu. Julia is a regular contributor in Forbes and Boston Business Journal on all things prenup. She is also Suffolk Law's 2024 Graduate of the Last Decade Award winner. Julia, thank you for being here. And finally, Dean Perlman. Andrew Perlman has served as the Dean of Suffolk Law since 2015 and is a national leader in legal innovation and legal education. Among other leadership roles, Dean Perlman was appointed as advisory council member of the American Bar Association's Task Force on Law and AI, the inaugural chair of the Governing Council of the ABA Center on Innovation, the vice chair of the ABA Commission on the Future of Legal Services, and the chief reporter of the ABA Commission on Ethics 2020. Dean Perlman has served as a presenter or panelist on more than 100 academic, judicial, and professional programs, 101 as of today, and across more than 20 US jurisdictions, 3 continents, and 6 countries. If anyone's got an Antarctica event, Dean Perlman's looking. Finally, he was named in 2024 as one of National Jurist's top 20 most influential people in legal education. Now, I want to do a little bit of level setting as we get to this program. Of course, we're in Sargent Hall, which is the home of Suffolk University Law School. How many people in the audience today are lawyers, law students, or otherwise legally trained people? Okay, so for those watching at home, it's roughly half. So this is actually fabulous because, speaking for myself, I do a lot of talking about legal innovation. It's almost all to other lawyers. So it's wonderful to be among a more diverse crowd in terms of background. Let me start with a question for Brian. Brian, you, like Julia and Andy, had traditional legal training. I looked you up on Wikipedia. You went to law school and graduated and passed the bar, but you did something different afterwards. How did you decide to put your chips on a path in legal technology as opposed to a traditional law firm path?
Well, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for the intro. I think when I went to law school, I was contemplating a bunch of different types of career options and whether I was going to do something else. And I think I knew from the beginning, even when I was in school, that I was not going to be destined to be a partner at a large law firm. I think I always had a little bit of a business tilt, was always looking for something that was going to be outside the law eventually. And I did. I graduated from school. I worked for a few years at a large law firm because everybody said that without working, you're not going to get any practical training and the education would go to waste. And I do think that's true, by the way. But what got me was, at the time the internet was really hot. I was looking to make my jump, and I just saw what was going on, from everything from online stock trading, tax preparation, travel. And I thought, why couldn't we do something different? Why couldn't we do this same transformation, the digital transformation that was happening everywhere else in other industries? And why couldn't we just, do that for law? And so that was the way I jumped out. I think it was because my partner Brian Lee and we contemplated other business models, but in the end, we just didn't know anything about anything else other than law, because that was our training.
Julia, when you started your career, you were a traditional family law lawyer, and at some point you said, no more of this. I am now a startup founder. You found success with Hello Prenup. Talk about the decision you made to leave traditional law practice and maybe some of the pressures that you felt to remain in. I mean, this is 3 years of education, a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of promise in a traditional legal career, and you stepped out. Why?
Well, I have to say, I have always had a passion for legal innovation and technology, and that started at Suffolk. And that actually is, I often talk about, started in Professor Tenenbaum's class. It was called Lawyers and Smart Machines. And we learned how to take legal technology solutions and apply them to practical legal problems, everyday legal problems. And so when I was working at the law firm, this is something that came up a lot. And so I started applying my experience at Suffolk and what I learned at Suffolk, and I started using that in the client intake process. And so I was able to make the client intake process for attorneys like 50% of the time it took before. This is something that I then saw as an opportunity. Okay, what else can I automate? And it was really fun to create this like little map on my wall of the automation that became Hello Prenup. Excuse me. And I think at a certain point I realized, this is where my passion is. Working at a traditional law firm, you're making pretty good money. It's comfortable. I loved working with clients every single day. One of my passions was and still is that interacting with people who are now our Hello Prenup customers, and at the time were my clients. And so it was really hard to step away from traditional law, but I knew I had to because I just loved Hello Prenup. I loved what I was doing.
Andy, I'm going to modify this question slightly for you because you don't work in a startup per se, but you took a traditional path, first as a lawyer, and then a legal academic, and when you became dean, you said, I want to do something a little different with Suffolk University Law School, and you started what was the first legal innovation and technology program in the country. Why did you, as dean, decide to put your chips on legal innovation and technology?
Well, the story started before I became dean, because as you noted, I was the inaugural director of our Legal Innovation Technology concentration, which is sort of a major that we have in law school, and it was the first of its kind in the nation, where we were teaching students how to automate legal documents, and Julia was one of the first students to go through that program. We were teaching students about design thinking, legal process outsourcing, a whole range of subjects and skills and knowledge that law students hadn't seen before and really weren't being taught anywhere else. And to your question, Gabe, why did I want to go into that area and why did I double down on it once I became dean? Is because it became very obvious to me through the work, you mentioned some of the roles I've had in the American Bar Association, it gave me a front row seat in the ways in which technology is transforming and was transforming the delivery of legal services. And it was really important to me as I became the leader of a school to help lead us in a direction that prepared our students for that rapidly changing world. And it seemed to me that it would be important for us to invest in more deeply in our legal innovation and technology work that had begun just prior to my time as dean, and I think those investments are paying enormous dividends, not only because of the amazing accomplishments of some of our more recent alumni, like Julia and others like her, but because that trend line that many of us saw a decade or more ago is only accelerating now because of a variety of developments, including generative AI. So that's why I didn't want to take on this role just to be a caretaker. I wanted to help this institution prepare itself for a rapidly changing world.
I want to talk next about regulation. So for those of you who are coming from outside the legal industry, you should recognize that law in some way is a gated community. The franchise of offering legal advice is reserved for licensed attorneys. In fact, it is a crime to offer legal advice without a law degree. And there were important startup companies, chiefly LegalZoom, Brian, you can see where this is going, that came along and challenged those borders to some degree. So Brian, if you'd be kind enough, could you talk a little bit about how you as a founder with LegalZoom and in your current work think about the regulatory environment of law, of getting legal services to people by means other than traditional licensed attorneys, and the challenges you face in doing that?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. There are regulatory hurdles and challenges, and traditionally there has been a lot of, let's just say, guardians in terms of the sphere of law and what that is. But I think what's really important is to also understand that simultaneously there are a lot of lawyers and legal practitioners, academics who are trying to expand the access to legal services. And so for us, when we started LegalZoom, I think it was just as important for us to not antagonize lawyers and to say that we really are working in conjunction with lawyers, and we are doing something that's really helping and benefiting individuals who couldn't have access, who really couldn't afford attorneys, who would have never used attorneys in the first place. And I think it was really important to also in our marketing to not, the easiest thing to do, honestly, would be to make lawyer jokes. And that would have been the easiest thing to do. And we never did that because we knew that that would have turned the profession against us. So that's the way we analyzed it. We said, if we really are doing something that's benefiting people, we do it in the right way. And we know what the boundaries are as well. We know, what is the practice of law, what is not, what are these exceptions that have been passed on for decades, and we abide by those rules. I think we can do something that's really innovative. That's the approach that we took.
I want to flip the regulatory question to one having to do with law schools. Dean Perlman, can you talk a little bit about the duty of competence for lawyers vis-a-vis technology and the role you played in that and the direction that you see that going?
Sure. Just coming back to something Brian said, LegalZoom has done a great service for the legal community because some of the litigation they helped to win, especially around the unauthorized practice of law, which is a common concern for legal tech companies. And LegalZoom has been really at the forefront for a number of years in battling in a number of different states various efforts to try to shut them down in ways that don't benefit the public and that were dressed up as unauthorized practice of law, but really were quite protectionist in their orientation. But you asked a question about the duty of competence in Rule 1.1, and you mentioned my prior role as the chief reporter of the ABA's Ethics 2020, which was looking at updating the model rules of professional conduct, which for those of you who are not lawyers, are the rules that are replicated in most jurisdictions around the United States as the rules that govern lawyers. And when we were looking to update the rules in light of technological change, what we noted, somewhat shockingly, is that the word technology appeared nowhere in the model rules of professional conduct. And we thought the appropriate place for a reference to technology would be in the duty of competence. And there was a new comment language added to the rule regarding competence that essentially instructed lawyers that they not only have to stay abreast of changes in the law and its practice, but in terms of technological change, be aware of the benefits and risks of its use. Now you fast forward from that comment to today, and I think that has some pretty profound implications for the future of the legal profession. I think that any competent lawyer needs to understand how to deliver legal services better, faster, and cheaper through the use of technology and innovation. And I give regular talks on what generative AI is going to mean for the future of legal services. And although there is a lot of hand-wringing right now over whether it reflects incompetence to use generative AI tools in the delivery of legal services, and people are raising questions about confidentiality and the like, I believe it will not be too long before we say not only is it competent to use generative AI, it would be incompetent not to use it. And I think it will go through a very similar transformation that we saw with email. 25 years ago, bar associations were issuing ethics opinions cautioning lawyers not to use email because of the confidentiality concerns. You fast forward 25 years, and now in many states, you cannot be a licensed lawyer unless you have an email address. And I think we are going to see a very similar process and evolution in lawyers' use of generative AI and similar technologies. And it does go to the core of the duty of competence. And that's coming back to the initial question you asked, why I felt so strongly that we need to invest in that kind of training here at Suffolk Law.
For decades, in fact, for centuries, legal work, things like doing prenuptial agreements, was the work of traditional lawyers. Then with companies like LegalZoom, it became apparent that technology in some places could do equally as well for lower cost and more convenience for the consumer. Of course, Hello Prenup takes advantage of that set of technologies and that set of methods. But it's interesting because in some ways, Hello Prenup has worked together with the legal community to give people sort of the best of all worlds. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with the legal community as a legal tech founder of Hello Prenup?
Absolutely. So I always say Hello Prenup would not have been able to do anything that it does today without all of the work that LegalZoom did to make it possible with UPL issues. And then in terms of, how Hello Prenup interacts with the legal community, I think it's really important to know because people think of, generally people think of Hello Prenup as being this platform solution that uses technology to allow people to create a prenup without a lawyer, and that's not necessarily true. Certain states require attorneys. And so over the last 2 years, we've integrated in attorneys to our system. So in all 45 states now, you can actually go create a draft of your prenup with your partner. So you have autonomy over the process. You can actually negotiate the terms together because you're married, right? You should be able to do that. And then you can add on attorney services at any point. So you can add on attorney services in the form of a Q&A session, you can ask some questions, or even representation. And so what we've done is we've partnered with attorneys and allowed them the opportunity to get more clients without paying us anything. We don't make $1 off of attorney services. I always like to remind people of that. And it also makes the process of creating prenups faster and more efficient for the attorneys. So the attorneys can communicate with their clients through the platform. They can edit the prenup through the platform. We're now integrating in, since we're talking about AI, we're now integrating in AI so that the attorneys can actually work faster on those edits. So we have something called the clause library that allows the attorneys to save clauses that they use a lot. It allows them to add additional clauses and write those clauses using AI. And we obviously have a lot of safeguards in place to make sure PII is removed. And it just allows the attorneys to work faster. And so we have a wonderful relationship with the attorneys we work with because they love editing in our editor and through our platform, knowing that it makes their job faster.
Julia and Brian, neither of you have MBAs. You're both legally trained people who have had very, very successful startups. Julia, I'm going to start with you. What's a skill related to business that you wish you had learned before you started this company, and how did you manage to learn the rest of them along the way? And Brian, prepare yourself, because that's coming at you next. Julia, go for it.
I don't know if I have a good answer for this. I wish, if I had gone to business school, I would have loved to learn all the terms, right? Because all the acronyms people throw at you every single day. I'm half kidding, but I think that management is a big one, right? So the ability to manage and work with people is something that I think they teach you in business school. I think you learn in doing business. But it's something that I really had to take from my time as an attorney and working directly with clients and take those kind of, I don't know, like communication skills and morph them into a place where I could now manage a team of 13 employees remotely, no less. So it's something that I'm still working on every single day. I'm constantly taking continuing education classes to try and get better at it. But certainly there's always room for improvement.
Brian?
I think Julie is completely right. It's all about the management of the people, leading teams, and just building teams as well. I'll tell you, I'll give you a little story, which is I actually tried to apply to business school. I tried to do a joint degree, a JD MBA, and I actually got rejected. And I went and did an interview afterwards with the admissions office at business school and asked, why did I get rejected? And the person said, Brian, you talked about the coursework. You talked about how you wanted to learn, finance, accounting. It's like, that's not what we consider to be the most important thing in business school. What you failed to talk about was the team projects, the teamwork. And we used to joke at the law school, because it was right next to the business school, about how we used to have these, parties. We used to have these keg parties. And the business school was much smaller than law school, but they bragged about how many more kegs of beer they can drink than us. And we thought that was the silliest thing ever. But now I understand that those social aspects, getting together and knowing how to work with other people and building those social bonds, that is what business school really does teach you. And it's one thing I do wish I picked up on a little bit earlier.
I'm going to flip that for you. I don't want kegs of beer to be part of your answer, but when you think about preparing law students for the future of legal work and for roles like the ones that Julie and Brian have successfully executed, how do you think about the curriculum? What are the things that we need to do for law students who don't go on to get an MBA, who want to use their JD as a standalone experience to become legal tech entrepreneurs and founders?
One of the central features of law school is something we call issue spotting. When you are a first-year law student, you take classes in torts and property and contracts and civil procedure. And it's not like we are expecting our students to remember all of the details of the law that they study in the first-year law school. There's no way they possibly could. Moreover, when they get out in practice, they're going to encounter a whole range of issues that they didn't see in law school. What we are trying to teach our students is a kind of issue spotting. That is concepts, so that when they encounter them in practice, they can say, oh, I've seen something like this before. I don't remember this particular area of law, but I know enough to find it and learn what I need to know to be able to guide this particular client. So to your question, Gabe, what do I want our students to learn about the future of law practice? I want our students to be exposed to the current state of technology and innovative ways of delivering legal services across the board, regardless of practice setting. And it's not because I expect that they're going to be using those tools when they get out in practice. We all know that technology evolves pretty rapidly, especially these days. But what I do want them to learn is a kind of issue spotting when it comes to the delivery of legal services. What I want us to be able to do from a curricular perspective is apply the concept of issue spotting, which law schools have long used, and apply it to legal services delivery models. So when a student goes out in practice, whether they go into litigation, transactional work, they go in-house, you name it, when they see a particular service and a particular client need, they think to themselves, you know what, I learned something in law school that's relevant to this situation. I bet I can do it better, faster, and cheaper. And there's no better example of that than Julia, because she was exposed to these automated document assembly concepts when she was in Gabe's class. She goes out into family law, and she realizes that the nature of some of the work that she was doing was capable of automation. And it's exactly that kind of mindset that I hope we can teach in law school.
Julia, congratulations. You are a wealthy venture capitalist now. If someone was to offer you $100 million to invest in legal technology, what would be an idea that you'd put it in that would change the world? I told you you're getting hard questions.
I had no heads up on any of these questions, by the way.
She's going to donate it to Suffolk Law School in support
There you
of
go.
our legal innovation and technology.
That is correct. I think something to do with actually exactly what you're saying is access to justice and AI. I think that's an area that I find really interesting, and I think AI has the capability to solve so many pitfalls of the legal system and how those who don't have access to justice interact with the legal system. So I don't have an exact business plan for you, Gabe, but that's kind of the idea.
I approve. Brian, this is coming to you next. So for those of you who are not legally trained, access to justice is a term that we use regularly. You may know from high school civics or from a con law college class, people who are accused of a crime in the United States, if they can't pay for a lawyer, they're entitled to have one given to them for free, just like they say on the cop shows. If someone is in civil legal trouble, and there can be serious civil legal problems, they are not entitled by law to an attorney. So that means if someone's being evicted from their home, if they're being sued in a debt collection action, if they have a child that's in need of supervision, quite simply, they are on their own. And you can imagine scenarios where one party has a lawyer and one party doesn't. You can imagine who wins most of the time. One of the visions that I think we collectively share is this idea that using technology, you can help close that problem, which is called the access to justice gap. Brian, coming back to you, can you talk a little bit about the access to justice gap and your view on it? Of course, LegalZoom, which provided low-cost access to important legal forms and other materials to people, was perhaps the prime example of a market solution to the A to J gap. How do you think about that set of problems?
Yeah, the way I always thought about it was really simple, which was from a business perspective, there's a huge unmet need. And there are people who have the means to pay something for it. They just couldn't afford, and they can't afford to pay the hundreds of dollars an hour that a typical attorney would charge for it. And it's not just the price of an hour of time, $300, $400, $500. It's the fact that you don't know how much it's going to cost. You don't know how many hours it's going to take. It could be, so the bill could be $5,000. It could be $50,000. You just don't know. And that was the way I viewed it, as we gotta find a solution that will solve this problem, which is an unmet need, and it's a huge business opportunity. And going back to what you were talking about earlier and your question with Julia, I think, this is an incredible time in terms of legal innovation. When we started LegalZoom, of course, 24 years ago, you couldn't get anybody interested in talking about any of this stuff. I think the number of people interested in legal innovation in the whole country probably could have fit in a bedroom, right? But now, there are conferences with thousands of people and people from outside the legal industry who are looking to get into legal innovation, legal technology, because they see the same thing. They see tremendous opportunity and an unmet need. And it's because the legal profession, in terms of adopting technology, is far, it's definitely not one of the early adopters. It's definitely in the latter stages, late follower stages. So that creates even more opportunity because it hasn't been subject to a lot of the innovation and a lot of the efficiency gains that other sectors have gotten. So I think this is a great time to get into legal technology. I think that's why you see so much excitement over it. And I think the pace of innovation is just going to, it's exponentially growing over the last few years.
Thanks, Brian. And that tees up a good question for Dean Perlman. I want to talk about stealing. Specifically, what we as a legal industry or legal educators should steal from other fields. What should we think about saying, this thing that's happening in finance or healthcare or manufacturing or business? These are concepts that we should borrow and incorporate into legal education and legal profession. Anything we should steal?
Well, I think we cannot overstate the importance of interdisciplinary thinking. That's why, back to the initial question, both for this audience, it's still heartening to see that only half of you are lawyers or legally trained. I think what we need to steal from other industries is an interdisciplinary mindset. For too long, lawyers have really operated in silos, and we hire an occasional other professional here or there, but this is a real problem, and it's inhibited our ability to innovate in meaningful ways. Partly it's a cultural problem, partly it's a regulatory problem. We've already talked a little bit about them, but there are certain rules that are in place that make it exceedingly difficult to partner with people who come from other disciplines. So there's a rule of professional conduct, Rule 5.4, without getting too nerdy about it, essentially prohibits lawyers from partnering with other kinds of professionals in a legal services business. So when Brian or Julia wants to create a company that delivers legal services, they cannot accept investments from people who are not themselves lawyers. And so their only option, if they accept that kind of money, which they did in both cases, is to ensure that they are not defined as the practice of law. And thankfully, because of the great work that LegalZoom has done and that Julia referenced, the automation of legal documents has been defined as not the practice of law, which enables those kinds of businesses to grow. But if we want to see innovation across the board outside of companies like theirs, what we need to steal from other industries is a freedom to be able to partner with other kinds of professionals in the work that we do. So I think that is partly cultural and, like I said, partly regulatory, but I think at its core, that is a big part of what we need to do as a legal profession.
Thanks for that. And I'll share one anecdote. I spend a lot of time talking to bar associations and local lawyers about what we're doing here at Suffolk to try to get them excited about us and our alumni. And one of the things I talk about regularly is our course in process improvement and legal project management, where we teach these industrial tools like Lean and Six Sigma. My colleague back there from the business school is saying that's old hat. People have come up to me at the end of the presentation and said, "Did you folks just invent this?" These are ideas from 1920. They are literally 100 years old, but they're revolutionary in law. So there's all sorts of interdisciplinary opportunities to do interesting things beyond learning the doctrine of law. I just talked about the past. I want to talk a little bit about the future. The year is 2035. How do you think consumers will interact with the law in 2035? Julia, take it.
Well, there was a Harris poll in 2022 that said something like 75% of individuals aged 18 to 54, when posed with a legal problem, would prefer to use a legal technology solution instead of a traditional law firm, if available. And I find that really interesting because it shows this really great shift towards legal tech as being a solution in conjunction with traditional legal services. So I would say if it's, what year is it?
2035.
2035.
You can make it 2045 if you want.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I think that people will be, when they have a legal problem, they will be interacting with AI in a way that hopefully the ABA will come up with some type of rule around this or regulation so that we can follow it without injuring any individuals who are asking for legal advice. But AI will be able to actually answer at least some of the question. And I think that, my biggest fear, if we're talking about 2035 or 2045, is that the profession will not have any type of regulation in place. And then we will have more of these do not pay situations where we have basically a robot lawyer going into court. And although in this instance, the do not pay instance, they weren't able to move forward with representation of the individual on a traffic ticket, we can say, look, a traffic ticket is not a big deal. This person couldn't afford an attorney. But I think my main concern is if there isn't regulation in the future, we're going to be dealing with a robot lawyer in a criminal proceeding. And, that could be incredibly dangerous. So I think that AI will be a huge component of legal tech and how people interact with lawyers or law in the future. I just hope that we have regulation in place to ensure the highest quality interaction with those tools.
Dean Perlman, I just asked Julia how consumers will interact with law in 2035 or 2045. How do you think a lawyer will interact with technology in 2035 or 2045?
I think it's going to be pretty dramatically different. I'm a big fan of the quote often attributed to Bill Gates that we underestimate, or I should say, we overestimate the amount of change that we will see in 2 years and underestimate the amount of change that we'll see in 10. And I think that perfectly describes the situation in which we find ourselves now with regard to technology and the delivery of legal services. I think if we come back in this room 2 years from now, we'll see some changes in the legal profession, but they won't be revolutionary. But if we come back in 2035 or especially 2045, I think what's going to be different is almost everything in terms of the way that lawyers go about their work. Just the simple act of creating legal documents or legal information is going to be generated in an entirely different way. Right now, most lawyers for most kinds of legal documents, they are going to open up a Microsoft, with their favorite word processor. They're going to open up an old version of the document. They're going to do a find and replace and save it as a new document or some variation of that. And there are some practice areas that have automated document assembly tools on the margin. But that's pretty much it. It's still opening up a blank screen and starting to type or opening up an old document. I think we get to 2035 and especially 2045, a lawyer is simply going to say, I need to create a new trust and estates document. And then an AI tool is going to guide the lawyer through a series of questions and answers to help the lawyer figure out the best way to build out that document, drawing on perhaps a proprietary database of documents that the lawyer or the law firm has in their possession, and then generate the information for the client. And that is a completely different way of thinking about the generation of legal information and legal documents. And I think that's probably just the beginning. There's stress testing your arguments, analyzing an opponent's position, analyzing a negotiating position, developing, looking at a document that you may have, a policy document of some kind, and critiquing it, summarizing large volumes of information, drafting the facts section of a brief. All of these elements of legal work are going to be capable of being replicated and automated by the time we get to 2045. So I think the practice of law is going to look pretty markedly different by that time. I should note, just one closing thought, that as much as many elements of the job are going to look very different in 20 years, I think there are certain elements that will remain the same. I think there are certain skills that we are going to look to lawyers for that are still going to be important. The word counselor is often used to describe lawyers because they often counsel clients. And as much as many people do value the efficiency and the ease of using an automated tool, sometimes they just need a human being to guide them through the process. And I think lawyers are going to play an important role. The negotiation process oftentimes is going to require lawyers to be involved. And then there are certain areas of law that may be capable of automation, but where as a society, we're just not willing to accept machines being involved, including resolving disputes that are high stakes. We are going to want human beings involved in that process in a material way. So I don't mean to suggest that lawyers won't be involved or that human beings won't be involved. They will be, and some of the traditional skills that I think we have long emphasized will still be relevant. But I do believe that the way in which lawyers go about much of their work will be significantly different.
Brian, I want to talk a little bit about credibility in technology. Several of the things that Dean Perlman just said suggest this idea that for technology adoption to happen, people have to have some faith that the technologies that they adopt will treat them right. We have an archetypal vision of the lawyer as, the Atticus Finch sort of wise elder who puts their hand on your shoulder and sort of guides you through a problem. That's presumably a vastly different experience for most folks than going on a website, clicking to answer some buttons and getting a form spit out. And yet LegalZoom at its basic core did that, right? How did you and does one build that sort of credibility with clients, with users, that makes them feel comfortable using a technology like LegalZoom or like Hello Prenup?
So at the very beginning, Gabe, when we started, of course, we had to do everything we could to get that type of credibility because it was still in the early stages. But that type of questioning whether the machines are any good, whether they know what they're doing. Today, we have those questions around AI because we've seen AI make mistakes. But give this another few years and you're going to see those mistakes becoming fewer and fewer, far between. So I don't think, people will trust the AI at some point more than they trust a lawyer. But one thing that you mentioned, and Dean did too, which is that human relationships in the end, I believe, still really matter. And as case in point, I think there's something about, hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution where we are trained to be social creatures. And if you think about what the law really is from a very, very high level perspective, it's a set of rules that govern human behavior and it governs relationships among us, right? And so I think that having people in it is really still important. And how you can make the system, let's say, whatever your AI system is, the more human-like it is, the more human it acts and feels, the more successful it will be. And it's not just the AI itself, it's the entire user experience. Now, one thing, I was drawn to Julia and Hello Prenup is I think that her user interface is really exceptional. It really creates and does something, that no other legal document generation, if you want to put it in a very generic sense, did, because it doesn't feel like just, mechanical legal document generation. It felt more human. And the interaction that you created creates that, not just the human feeling, but I think that creates value. And so I think when you do that, that is how you overcome some of the fears that people have about the machines, that they know that there's really experienced people behind it. And then you really cared about the way my experience is when I interact and I work and I'm on your website. And if you care about that, I think it overcomes a lot of those fears.
Ryan, I'm going to stay with you here, but I'll ask both of the other panelists to answer as well. You've now had 3 fabulously successful startup. The other panelists have been fabulously successful in their innovative ventures in legal innovation and technology. Is there a secret formula?
Sorry, were you talking to me? I guess so.
Is there a secret formula to success when it comes to legal innovation and technology? You've had 3 successful ventures.
I wouldn't say there's a secret formula, but I do think that there's one strategy that tends to work, which is that the legal field is so big, it's so gigantic, there's so much opportunity everywhere, and people tend to attack everything at once and try to solve every problem at once. If somebody just comes out and says, you know what, I'm going to do whatever, AI law, for what? For everything. Or just, AI document generations for everything. That's not a good sign of success. You really have to be strategic. You have to pick one small area and really become the best at solving that one problem. Do that well, and then you can expand and move on. I think that's one of the things I've seen as a common denominator among a lot of the companies that have been successful.
Julia, is there a formula for success in legal innovation and technology? What is it?
Yes, and I think just building off of what Brian was saying, I think you really have to have passion for what you're doing. And so when I chose my niche, I chose prenups because I always say I'm kind of a study of the human condition, right? I love hearing about people's relationships. I love helping them get on the same page so they can have this wonderful marriage. And it's something that I learned working in a law firm. And so I think it's that passion for whatever the niche is that you choose. You have to really love it. And every single person that I have hired in my company has that passion. Sarah Beth, my co-founder, she emailed me and said, hey, I got engaged. I need a prenup. And I found it. So she was just so excited about the product because she was living it. Lauren, my chief marketing officer, same thing. I met her. She had a bad prenup experience. Almost every single person in my company has some experience with prenups or some passion around personal finance and relationships. And so I think that for me, it's just you have to really love what you're doing, because if you don't, then you're not going to interact with your customers the same way. You're not going to care about the feedback you receive from them. You're not going to care about the feedback you receive from the attorneys on the platform. And then you're not going to iterate in a way that constantly, improves the experience. So again, it all comes down to passion for me.
Dean Perlman, you've built the #1 ranked legal innovation and tech program in the world. You have, under your own name, helped to draft the rule that defines the duty of technological competency. You helped to start the ABA Center on Innovation and inspire 1 million lawyers in America to be better at these things. What's the formula to doing this stuff?
Well, I think you dramatically overstate my contributions, but I appreciate it. I would say that if we're all being honest with ourselves, anyone who's had any sort of success in any field has to attribute it at least partially to luck, and right place, right time. And in my case, I've always had a passion for technology, going back to, and I'm going to really date myself here, programming my Commodore 64 back in the day. And when I got here and worked as an academic, and this is probably my one substantive contribution and answer to your question, is I started to see a connection between two fields that didn't have an obvious connection. My interest in technology from my days of programming a Commodore 64 and the law. And it was happenstance that those two fields started to come together in a meaningful way. And that's the part that's a little bit lucky. And that those two passions really came together in 2005 going forward. I started to write about, blog about some of these issues, and my career started to unfold in ways that led to some of the things you described. But it was happenstance. But I think to the extent that someone is trying to game it out because you can't game out luck, it's think about how you can connect two areas of interest that other people are not connecting. And I think if you compare them and also anticipate where the market may go and pair two interests in a meaningful way, it gives you an opportunity to stand out in whatever field you may be in whatever business you may launch. And for me, it was technology and law. But for a lot of startups, they make similar kinds of connections. They see those ways in which two fields intersect that other people aren't seeing. And I think that can be a recipe for success.
I have one more question, and then I'm going to invite people in the audience to ask their questions in the last few minutes that we have. I also understand that there's a bar crawl, and I don't want to be the person that holds up the bar crawl, so we will end promptly at 6. Brian, I'll start with you. I know people have been inspired by all of you today. Let's say someone that is someone that was here today was so inspired that they said, after the bar crawl, I'm going to go home and I'm going to spend the rest of my night trying to get involved in legal innovation and technology. I want to spend my time doing one tangible thing to have a better understanding about how this field works or how to get involved in it. What's one tangible thing that they can do, that they can watch, that they can read, that they can think about today to start their path in legal innovation and technology?
I think the fact that they attended this conference and the fact that they're here, that's a huge one. I would say, talk to your friends, talk to the people that you know, and ask them what problems have they experienced. Anybody who is a consumer of law, what have you experienced and where could it be better? Because I think you really, if you throw a rock into this ocean that is the legal market, you're going to find something that could be done better and something that could be done better with technology, and just really putting yourself into that shoe, learning as much as you can about being that consumer. I think that's the one thing that's going to help you really identify what that niche is and where you can make a contribution.
Dean Perlman, other than enrolling in Suffolk Law, what's something someone can do today to get a better, deeper understanding of legal innovation and technology?
I'll give one flip answer and one serious answer. The flip answer is ask ChatGPT, and you might get a pretty good answer, actually. The other is read pretty much anything by Richard Susskind. We launched our Legal Innovation and Technology Institute 12 years ago in this room with Richard Susskind giving the keynote presentation right where that screen is over there. And it was a really meaningful moment for us. I remember us extending the invitation to him because he was such a thought leader, and just read any of his books, and I think it will inspire you about what's possible.
Julia?
I would say start networking. I think that if you start talking to people who have worked in law, work in legal tech, you will start getting a real feel for what needs to be innovated on, and how things are working now. I mean, if you're a lawyer, you probably have some baseline for that. And then networking will be even more valuable because you will be able to learn from those who are in the space. So kind of going back to Brian's point when he was talking about business school, I think relationships are really important. And if you then want to go into legal tech, ultimately, if you decide it's your thing, you will have a handful of people you can call on and ask for advice.
I'm going to add my own just because I can. There are all these wonderful resources that provide effectively daily roundups of what's happening in legal innovation and technology in terms of startups, law firm innovation, corporate law departments, legal education. You might check out the blog Law Next by a local writer, Bob Ambrosi, who has international influence, Artificial Lawyer by Richard Tromans, and just get involved in the LinkedIn community. If you and I are not LinkedIn, feel free to connect with me. I frequently relink. I don't know what the term is, other people writing interesting things, but there are a lot of people writing about what's happening in legal innovation and technology. And before long, something will catch your fancy and you'll want to dive deeper. So we have just a few moments left. If there are questions from the crowd for any of our panelists, Puck will be in a position. I think this person right here had her hand up.
Hi, nice to meet you. Unlike a good portion of this room, I'm not a trained legal professional. I'm actually an undergraduate corporate entrepreneurship and business law student at Suffolk. So I actually came because being an aspiring law student and of course legal entrepreneur, I wanted to have a kind of an idea of what you're expecting in both legal education in the next couple of years and what it's going to take for after we actually go out into the actual workforce in the legal field, what we should be expecting as our biggest challenge and then our biggest thing to be excited about.
Dean Perlman, I think that's one for you.
Yeah. The big challenge, I think, is that the practice of law and the delivery of legal services is going to change a lot in the coming years. And that's also the opportunity and the excitement. The way that I've described it is traditionally when someone graduates from law school, they go out and they get trained by an employer, a law firm, or what have you. This is an opportunity where you can flip that traditional narrative, because I can tell you, I give presentations to a lot of law firms and in-house legal departments, and I ask how many people have used generative AI. Very few hands go up, even now. And you would have the opportunity to learn the skills necessary to train them, so that the training goes both ways. So I think that's what the excitement is of this moment and the real opportunity for future lawyers.
Hi, thank you. This is really interesting. I'm Chris. I head up growth at a Vista Equity portfolio company, completely unrelated to law. I'm not a lawyer, and I do not play one on TV either, in case anyone was wondering. My question is, each of the attorneys that I work with over my career have seemingly positioned their specialty as so cloistered to the point where you are so heavily reliant on them. I'm wondering, what's your thought on what is the most difficult, I don't know what you call it, sector or specialty of law to crack into for new tech, or what's most ripe for an interesting disruption, call it?
That's a you question.
I think a lot of consumer law, the kind of retail type legal services that the typical person, individual might need, the kind of routine matters that are easily replicated and automated. And Julia found one in prenups. LegalZoom found others. And I think those are the most ripe for disruption. It's a lot harder for the kind of lawyers you're describing that have very narrow, very deep, sophisticated niche areas where the law is maybe changing regularly. There's a lot of gray area regulatory work it's about managing risk. That's not an area of law that really is suitable for the kind of automation we're describing. It's the more routine stuff, which is important to the people facing it. but it's, I think, more amenable to the kind of transformation we've been talking about.
Andy, if I can add something to that. So I'm going to flip the question a little bit. One of the things that we talk about frequently here is the latent legal market. So there are two communities of people that get legal services in the United States, rich people and very, very impoverished people. Very, very impoverished people have to get lucky and wait in a long line for legal aid. Very, very rich people can pay out of pocket. It's the middle group of people, which is the majority of Americans or people that are living in American society, that get shut out, right? And this is actually the niche that Hello Prenup and LegalZoom and other entities have filled. The sort of thing where someone is in need of legal services, but it's just a little too pricey for them to deal with it. So what do? You go and you get a prenup for a few $100s when a few $1,000s is out of your reach. So if you search the term latent legal market, there are a number of scholars that have written about this. And there's a working theory that the latent legal market, the number of people who have a live cognizable legal problem that aren't having their need met, is actually larger than the community of people who are paying for legal services in the US. I think we have this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for the amazing panel. I have a question that is related to the access of justice that was discussed earlier. So we're a startup that help personal injury lawyers work with their medical records. We're incubated 2 subway stations away at MIT. And one thing that we really notice is that the plaintiff side that operate on contingency basis is heavily more open-minded in discussing adopting new technologies. And then this relates to more access to justice, because then if they get 100 phone calls, they can actually review 10 cases instead of 5 cases, because now they can use our tool, for example. However, on the other side, which they same the exact same problems, they are really not that inclined to adopt new technologies. So my question is, with time, and given the current billable hours, and that it affects not only these big corporates, but also people that are trying to get services, as Brian explained, do you see that model changing, the billable hour model, or maybe somewhere to something to enable more access to justice over the big spectrum, maybe?
There are a couple of questions embedded in there, but on the billable hour side, people have been predicting the demise of the billable hour for as long as I've been in practice, which is now almost 30 years, and it hasn't happened. But I do think this time may be different. Generative AI is going to put an enormous strain on the billable hour in a lot of different practice settings, because so much more work is now going to be capable of automation and being delivered in a much more efficient way, that if lawyers and law firms want to make the same kind of money that they did in the past, they're going to have to charge in a different way and charge for their data and their expertise rather than the amount of time that they spend. So I do think that we are very likely to see that change. Personal injury law is an example of what I was describing. There's a lot of potential for automation there. And if you look at countries that have different versions of Rule 5.4 that I was describing before, in terms of the ability to partner with other kinds of professionals, personal injury work is one that is frequently at the top of the list for that kind of investment.
Brian, I see you nodding along. You've done some work with lawyer-to-lawyer referral, I believe, involving personal injury. We've got about a minute left. Would you like to have the last word?
Yeah, I just think that in terms of a couple things, in terms of like ripe for disruption, where something is needed for disruption, I would say anything that can figure out dispute resolution, because we know that, let's just say even a small business owner, if you've got a business dispute of like $25,000, you're really in a tough place. It's too big for small claims court. And you're going to spend more than that if you hire a normal lawyer to go and try to, get your invoice paid, because you say you're a contractor and you poured a bunch of concrete and you can't get paid. I mean, it's really, really tough. And so that's one area. In terms of the billable hour, I tend to agree that it is, of course, the plaintiff's attorneys are, they're the most likely to adopt some new models and new technology, because they're not based on the hourly, fees. And maybe in the future, this might be a 10-year thing, is that law firms will have a different business model. They have to adopt a completely different business model. Let's just say I'm an insurance company, for example, and instead of paying my lawyers on an hourly fee, maybe I pay them a fee based on, a theoretical, how much money can I save, or something else, something like that, where you're creating some sort of economic incentives as opposed to just incentive to work as much as you can. I don't have the answer for that. I just see that, areas such as even things like intellectual property and patent applications, that used to be done on hourly fees, and those are all done on fixed fees yet now. And a lot of those patent firms are early adopters of AI technology because they have been forced by the clientele to charge fixed fees. So if the clients end up demanding that, then the law firms will have to adapt. And I think that's what you're going to see. There will definitely be change. And you're right, we may not see it in 2 years, but in 10 years, we're going to look back and say, wow, I can't believe all that happened.
Brian, a terrific way to close it out. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dean Perlman. Thank you, Julia. Thank you all in the audience for your time, energy.
That was a really great session, all of you. Great session. Great that you're thinking about this, and that feels like we're in the center of the world here, innovating in the legal space. There's a career tech legal hiring session tomorrow. I don't know if you're all going to be there. You've heard about it, but anyone who finds this as a really compelling topic, make sure you're at the legal tech career hiring session tomorrow. And that's it. There's going to be a bar crawl over there. Thank you all. Thank you to Suffolk University. And this was a treat to end the day. Thank you, guys.